Hello and welcome to the COP29 Daily Show in partnership with High Impact. From the Olympic Stadium in Baku, I'm Rosanna Lockwood. Welcome to our very last Daily Show. On the last scheduled day of COP29 in Baku, negotiations are going down to the wire here, as is often the case at COP. The latest draft text, which countries are negotiating, was published this afternoon. The main sticking point has been a massive climate finance deal aimed at helping poorer countries adapt to and pay for the damage done by climate change. Now, let's take a look at the text with Stephen Cornelius, who's Deputy Global Leader of Climate and Energy for the World Wildlife Fund.
So we've just had a whole lot of new texts come from the presidency on all the different issues, and the main one being the so-called NCQG, which is the new finance goal. So the new text is much shorter, and it has two numbers in it. So one is 1.3 trillion, and one is 250 billion. And so the 250 billion is the amount of money that is required in the developed countries to provide to developing countries. Developing countries have been asking for a needs-based number, and that was 1.3 trillion. So having something like that in is a good step, but it's from all sources. So it's not as strong as if it had said a number from developed countries. Some of the texts have options in it, but this one on finance doesn't have any options. It's just a straight 5-page text, clean text that is can hopefully be used for negotiation. And so what you do have now is an iterative process where, okay, we've got this text, we're looking at it, countries will be looking at it, and then they'll be asked to comment on it. And I suspect that this won't fly, so there'll have to be at least one more iteration. It's very tilted towards developed countries' asks and away from developing countries. So I expect when they talk next in plenary, which I suspect will happen later, there'll be lots of fireworks. So I think it will run well into the night on Saturday.
Well, with us here in the studio now to untangle it somewhat further is John Verdiek, who is Director of International Climate Policy at the Nature Conservancy, and he helps negotiate parts of the historic Paris Agreement on behalf of the United States. Look, really good to see you there. And you were nodding along when we were just hearing that explained there. So you would agree with that these negotiations so far do seem to have tilted more in favour towards the developed versus the developing?
Well, I think, it's been a 2-week negotiation, and so you see many different rooms and many different issues, but this large, new, collective, quantified goal, we've seen different texts over the last weeks, but, it's always the text in the last day or two that really matters. And I think what we saw is 2 options a couple days ago in the previous text, and they've kind of merged the 2 options. And so neither group is going to see exactly what they want. I think the positive right now is we do see the numbers that are probably the correct numbers, the 1.3 trillion plus 250 billion of public funding. But what we don't see is the architecture that makes sure that you know who has to pay, by when, and is there any obligation and that sort of thing.
So this was the wording calling on all parties. Some are thinking that's just a bit too vague.
Even broader, all actors.
All
that
actors,
could be anybody in the planet Earth puts any money towards climate change that could count. So that is important for developing countries that did not say that, because you could be using your own domestic finance to fund something in your country, but why are we here at the United Nations negotiating kind of a transfer of funds?
Now, nature is what keeps you awake at night. It's your job, it's your vocation, it's what you're thinking about. And nature and biodiversity didn't really get much of a mention in this draft. What do you make of that?
They didn't. Nature and biodiversity are not in there, but neither is fossil fuels, very importantly. Fossil fuels is 75% of our global emissions. Nature can also be 1/3 of the solution by 2030. So we know we need both. We know we need all of this, but the presidency and the drafters of these texts also have to be careful. The more things that they put into the text, the more things there is to argue about.
Talk to us, because you've seen negotiations, you've handled negotiations. Talk to us about what they're like. For viewers around the world who've never been to a United Nations conference, and they're wondering just exactly how is this done and why is it so difficult to reach agreement?
Well, you have 190-some countries and parties to the agreement there, and many of them have very strong needs, and they're looking at it from different angles. One of the things we're hearing from developed countries now is the number. We want it to be ambitious, but we also need it to be realistic. They're dealing with budget constraints at home in their legislatures and their Congress, that sort of thing. They can't go back and just get money wherever they want it. On the other hand, you see the developing countryside, there's a need for this climate finance, and it needs to be there. So that's why you also see the kind of difference in public and private sourcing. We need to use what public funding we do have, and then we need to use it to amplify what kind of private finance to get the overall number that we're ultimately going to land on in the next day or two here.
Now, talk to me again about the drafting process, because some might wonder, well, why can't, you get all those people around a table and just put out an agreement and that be the end of it? Why do we have to go through all these multiple drafts?
Yeah, well, I think negotiators are a particular breed. The second you put out text on a table, or sometimes in these large rooms, if you put text up on the wall, they immediately start editing. So for a long time, what we usually see in the negotiations in certain rooms is the co-facilitators will put out ideas to discuss. They'll let the discussion start to build up. They'll try to listen to all parties. They'll try to bring an idea before they ever put it on paper, because the second they put it on paper, the red pens come out.
Yeah, interesting. And in terms of reactions when the drafts come out, it's sort of, the text can be quite wordy and technical, but then it takes people a few minutes, a few hours to start thinking about their reactions. Then we start seeing them being published or televised, and you get the full range of emotions and reactions. Are you ever going to get a document that pleases all parties?
I don't think so. In the Paris Agreement, we saw the same thing. The last couple nights, it was very tenuous. And you saw different texts kind of have a pendulum back and forth, that they kind of probed the red lines of different parties that were kind of the leading pushers or needers of different language. And I think we're going to see that again here. There's going to be a bit of an accordion. There'll probably be some new language added. There'll probably be some other language that'll drop out. The question here really is, do we get the main things we need? Do we get that quantum of 1.3 trillion? Do we make sure that it has a verb before it that is ambitious, such as decides, something that, such as that? Do we get the strong piece of the 250 billion? But then also, do we have that financial architecture that says, who is going to deliver it? Are they going to mobilize it, or does it just need to be a target? The target can be very fuzzy, and so we're seeing that right now.
And how do you measure that? A bit like emissions cutting targets or global temperature targets, and that's been all along some people's issue about measuring as you go. In terms of the financing and how it gets delivered to the people who need it, one of the big calls we're hearing from developing countries and the poorer countries, those most vulnerable to climate change, is they don't want to see it in the form of loans. Talk to us about why that is.
Correct. Well, I think all climate finance cannot all be grants, and we've seen that from public coffers from many of the developed countries in the world, and that is that $250 billion number. On the other hand, our global economy does work with loans. You can use them, but if you're a developing economy and you already have debt, it's not great to take on more debt to deal with the challenges of climate change, especially if you're a small country that hasn't emitted very many emissions in the world. You're dealing with somebody else's debt, and you're taking on debt to deal with somebody else's emissions. Something exciting today from the Nature Conservancy is we just announced a new debt for nature swap, a nature bond, together with the Bahamas government. One of the things we've been able to do is restructure debt to make sure the Bahamas puts it into environmental issues, but we can also take the interest rate of some of their debt down. And so it's kind of a win-win on whether it would be climate, biodiversity, and debt.
Fascinating stuff. Look, always good to speak to you, John Verdiek of the Nature Conservancy. Thank you. Well, with me now is Obed Karinga, who is Climate Policy Advisor from CARE International, based in Kenya. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
For coming to talk to us, because I'd really like to get, from your point of view, your reaction to the draft text we've seen so far this afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I will start to say that the text that we've received this evening is a bit of... It's actually a disappointment from what we expected. It's really like a slap on the face, especially on the developing countries that really expected to see, especially an ambitious goal or number that we have been asking for. As you know, developing countries have been asking for at least 1.3 trillion per year in terms of finance that is provided and mobilized. And what we only got today was a mere 250 billion, which really doesn't, I mean, it's a joke from where we sit, and really doesn't, it's a drop in the ocean compared to the amount of fund or goal that we had expected. So first of all, also to add, in addition to the goal, that actually doesn't meet what we expected. The text really is it's quiet in terms of the quality of finance, even that 250 billion. The quality that we have been looking for is grant-based finance and not in form of loans. And what we got today was a goal that actually speaks to having money mobilized from all sources, including private sector, MDBs, and which is, as you know, really is going to put much debt into developing countries. And we also saw that the text actually puts more burden to developing countries as well in terms of mobilizing. So it's like it expands the mobilization sort of base to include developing countries, which is totally unacceptable and against what the Paris Agreement really looks for.
So their negotiations will continue. Like several COPs before this, it hasn't quite found its finish line, and talks will probably continue throughout the weekend. Do you have any optimism that things will change, that this is just a certain draft now and that people will bat it back and we'll see something else tomorrow?
Yeah, from the presidency's communication in the morning, what was communicated was there will be a text coming this afternoon. Then once people react to it, they will do a final version. We really hope that that final version or the next version really is going to be responsive or really reflect what developing countries want. So we are still optimistic, and we came here in good faith to negotiate and to engage with developing countries. And this is a chance for them to build the trust that is already lost by ensuring that at least they give us, developing countries, a goal that is actually able to respond to the already suffering communities that we represent. If you look at that 250, it's not even sufficient to even support adaptation. And as you know, the recent adaptation gap report talks about up to 400 billion in terms of adaptation finance gap. So I think it's a slap in the face, as I said, and we hope that they're going to redeem themselves by actually agreeing and really negotiating to provide a goal that actually we can go home with and tell our communities that, yes, we got something and we're going to get climate justice. Otherwise, this is not climate justice at all, and we are not happy.
So your reaction to this, which you're sharing with us here today, and other reactions we've heard throughout the afternoon to the text, you're hoping that that will then lead on to a different version of the text still that could still come?
Yes. We expect another version, definitely. I know groups are now meeting. They have reconvened to review the text, and they are doing sort of final analysis to also forward their input. And this is how it has been before, even if you look at even Dubai. So there are different versions of the texts, and we hope that the new version is going to be better, and the presidency and the ministers are going to really take heed to the cry of developing countries by at least giving us something that we can I mean, we can really negotiate, or we can really say at least this makes sense. But the way it is right now, it's not something that we can take home. And of course, I will join the calls or other forces by saying that a no deal is better than a bad deal, because surely this is a bad deal.
Oba Karingo, we really appreciate you making time to speak to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, coming up after the break, we look at what has been agreed here so far and talk to a former COP chief negotiator. Welcome back to the Daily Show at COP29 in partnership with High Impact. My name is Rosanna Lockwood. Well, countries here are still poring over the latest draft text in the final negotiations, but some things have already been agreed. Let's take a look. Let's speak now to someone who has more than 20 years of experience in global negotiations, to put it lightly. Maria Espinosa is the former chair of the United Nations General Assembly and former Foreign Affairs Minister of Ecuador. And it's very good to see you. Thank you for making time.
I'm very happy to be here.
So we're sort of officially at the end of this COP, but really not, because, of course, discussions will probably continue on over the coming hours and days. And things do often get a bit like that. How would you summarise where we're at right now in terms of negotiations?
We are in the final stretch of the negotiations, and in the multilateral space, we often say that things get worse before they get better. And so basically, we are looking for a new number on climate finance. We had agreed on the 100 billion during the Mexican COP in Cancun, and now we are basically recommitting to a bigger number because the losses have been bigger, because the ambition for reducing emissions is higher, and because emissions continue to grow and climate impacts and shocks continue to happen everywhere in the world. And of course, they are the most vulnerable countries, mostly countries of the so-called global south, that are suffering the most, small island developing states, coastal communities that are going to pay a high price, massive displacements, food insecurity. We know what has happened, what is happening now because the climate crisis is here, and what will happen if we do not act. But there are good news. There are many issues that have been decided. For example, the text on technology, which is extremely important. You know, the transfer of low carbon technologies, especially to the countries of the global south. There is. I would say, I don't know what happened in the last half hour, but we have agreed or pre-agreed on the carbon markets text as well. So there are developments that are important.
And there are calls as well for certain developing countries that are also emitters themselves to have a role in the funding, although they may also receive some funding. And I know you've worked across many multilateral organisations in your experience, some of which have included China. Do you think China should be called upon more to act on a funding front?
Well, the truth is China, and they have said it publicly, China is the country that invests the most in renewable energies around the world already. So I think that they are, taking the responsibility to do that. And I think this is being part of the conversations, part of the equation, and also part of the shared responsibility. But of course, some countries have more responsibilities than others in the mitigation equation, in the reducing emissions for good, because unfortunately what we have seen, after 29 times that the Conference of the Parties has met, emissions just increase, impacts of climate shocks increase.
There have been some statements throughout the afternoon, especially when we were waiting for this second draft to be published, and some people saying that no deal on finance might be better than an agreement on finance that would be hard to pin down, to get countries to actually commit to beyond just discussion. Do you buy that argument?
I think that there are many expert analyses out there. I mentioned the Standing Committee on Finance of the Convention, but there is the Stern report that came up a few days ago. They are speaking about trillions. It's a serious assessment on how much money is needed, mostly in the case of developing countries that are low emitters, for adaptation and resilience building. So this is real money that is needed. And what are the sources of funding? Who has the responsibility to provide the resources? The devil is on the details. And I think that's what is keeping, the negotiations. They're really, being, in my opinion, serious and responsible to make sure that whatever agreement they reach, there is going to be, of course, accountability and transparency.
Maria Espinosa, thank you very much for making time to speak to us. I know you're going to be very busy this evening as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, that is all from the team here at the first ever Daily Show from COP, produced in partnership with High Impact. We hope you enjoyed it, and we really look forward to continuing the conversation at COP30 in Brazil.